And here we are. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here with us. It's the messy middle, right? Navigating the messy middle, part 3. Um, if you joined us for part 1 or part 2, you know, sorry, I should introduce myself. I forgot. Sorry, my name is Yasemin Arikan. I work with Rebecca Ryan, but I go by the name of Yas. That's usually easier for most folks. And I'm excited to host you today for our Futurist Friday. And as I started to say, if you have been with us for part 1 of part 2, you already know that we are doing a series using a framework called the 3 Horizons model. So let me share very briefly a screen with you to follow along. My goal is not to kill you with slides today, but I am a visual person and probably you are too. So I believe you see my slide with the title, and I believe you see a picture of Rebecca from one of the previous sessions. This is her drawing, pointing out the 3 horizons of this model. So Horizon 1, just as a brief review, Horizon 1 is about the state of things, systems, norms, practices, anything that is now phasing out. That's the blue loop, right? Blue curve. Horizon 3 in green in this image is about the things that are trying to emerge, right? The future that is trying to, there are signals, it's happening on the edges or the margins. It's the future that is trying to emerge. That's Horizon 3 in this model, to think about contextualizing about what's going on. And Horizon 2 is the thing, the orange or yellow colored curve in the middle. And that curve, that's what we're calling the messy middle. How do we get from where we are, what's happening today, to where we want to go, what is trying to emerge? And this part can get messy. So what we're going to talk about today is basically a process you can use that's repeatable. You can do it on your own or with teams. But what you're doing is coming up with pilot projects you can use to cross from where Rebecca's finger is right now, that intersection between the blue line, what is fading out, and the orange line. How do you get from that intersection to the intersection of the orange line and the green curve, what is trying to emerge? You or your team is the thing that's happening to the future, pushing, tipping things in favor of supporting what is emerging. You are helping cross this chasm with these pilot projects. So that's the idea of the messy middle. What are you going to do? How are you going to shift things to the new normal, to the future that is trying to emerge? So for this process, I'm going to give you the big picture answer right away. This is the big picture process, and I'm going to spend most of today with you diving into one of these more deeply. So none of this is terribly complicated or rocket science, but step number 1 is develop a generative question on your issue, problem, or domain. I will elaborate on this. What does it mean? Basically, what is it that you are trying to improve or create? And it's not just coming up with a topic, but formulating a question, a fruitful, a productive question on that thing you're trying to create. This is the step we're going to dive into today, having you apply the step to your own issue or question or the thing you want to create. The creating thing is the Horizon 3 representation. So this is step 1. And actually, just a brief reminder, step 0 is you got to care for yourself first. I'm sure you hear this a lot during these times, but if you have to have the energy and the motivation, and self-care is number 1, basically, because if you have the right mindset, this is not a sprint, this is not an easy jump to make from the left to the right. you got to care for yourself first, feed your soul first, right? Before you get started on step one. That's just a primer there. So step one, that's it. Sounds easy, more on that later. Then the second step in this process is something what I'm calling identifying your existing assets that could help answer that question. What are some assets you have? Assets can come in a variety of types. In an approach called strategic doing, assets means what skills do you have? What social networks do you have? What physical assets, like maybe it's just your living room, or maybe it's equipment or a place. What are your physical assets? Do you have capital? Maybe you have access to programs you run. Assets come in many shapes and forms, but what you're doing in this step is you're using the question you generated in step one, and you're only brainstorming assets that could, you don't know yet how, but they could somehow help address this question. That's what's happening in this step. Again, this is just a big picture overview. Now, in this third step of this process, the trick is you're playing connect the dots among these different assets. Ideally, assets come not just from yourself, but also from your teammates. So what you're doing is you're looking at your complete set of assets that you brainstormed. Maybe it took you only 10 minutes. Maybe you took a whole week to come up with a spreadsheet inventory of these assets. It's up to you. But what you're doing in this step is you're connecting two or more assets into an idea, preferably as many ideas as possible. So let me give you an example. Let's say your question, the thing you're trying to improve, has something to do with nurturing an entrepreneurial ecosystem in the community. I just made that up. And let's say you and the members on your team, together, somebody knows the local Chamber of Commerce. Somebody else knows the teachers at a local high school. Yet another person knows or has access to perhaps a makerspace with 3D printers or a crafting workshop. Yet another person maybe happens to have the technical expertise and time to mentor someone else. These are just some examples, but if you put these things together, you might have, let's say one idea might be to put high school students in a mentorship program with local business leaders to practice and build their own entrepreneurial efforts. For example, that was just one idea. There's many more possibilities. But what you're doing in step 3 is connect as many different ways these assets and come up with as many ideas as possible. All specifically to answer that question that you came up with in the first place. In this next step, you're going to choose your top 3 or 4 things that sound exciting or a lot more fleshed out, or you can be top 5, it's up to you, but pick a subset of this large set of ideas that you've generated, and you're going to identify the big easy among them. Now, what is the big easy? The big easy is actually 2 things. It's something that is both high in impact and relatively easy to execute. It's both of those things, not one or the other. So I'll go more into this, but you end up ranking each opportunity in terms of impact first. Do you think it has high impact or low impact? And then once you've done that for each potential idea, then you go back to the top of your list and you say, all right, do you think this is relatively easy to execute or relatively difficult? And you can use this rating system to come up with total scores, and you get it's based on a subjective evaluation for sure, but it's you're kind of using math and ranking to come up with which idea is possibly both the highest impact and relatively easy to execute for this team of people that have brainstormed this idea, just conceptually. Now, just because an idea wins mathematically in your rating system does not mean necessarily that you have to pick that one to proceed with. What is just as important is, what is your energy level? How excited do you feel about that winning idea, that highest ranking idea? Sometimes there may be situations when you're picking the second spot, not the first spot. It just depends on, sometimes the scores are very close. Um, sometimes Sometimes one simply speaks more to you. It might be a little more difficult to execute, or maybe it's a little less impactful than the other idea, but energy and excitement in pursuing that opportunity are just as important as these more objective rankings in terms of impact and difficulty level. And then what you end up doing is, well, okay, you got an idea, you've picked something that you're excited about and are thinking about seriously executing on. Well, then this is something that I think most of you already know very well how to do it, is you got to flesh it out into an actionable pilot project, something you can execute within weeks, maybe 3 to 6 months, but nothing longer than that. You want to learn quickly from this pilot project about what is working, how to do this better, how to execute this in a way that helps you learn and adapt. And then you can design always your next domino piece, if you will, your next pilot project, but it's a little bigger based on this learning experience. So what you end up doing is, with this process, you're developing a series of domino pieces that will get you from one intersection, right, all the way to the bigger goal you're trying to achieve, or the new future, or the horizon 3 you're trying to create. It's a series of projects that build on the successes and the learning of the previous project. That's sort of the big picture approach to take. Now, this is the big picture view. What I would like to do with you is this. I would like to tackle step number 1 with you. Creating that generative question. What does that look like? What is it? How might you do it? So I encourage you at this moment, or I should say, I invite you at this moment, please get a piece of paper ready, a writing utensil if you don't already have that nearby. It does not have to be certain colors. I just need you to have something to write on for yourself. So I'll give you a few seconds for that. While you're doing that, so let me know. So just to be clear, what do I mean by a generative question? By that, I mean, when you and your teammates, or if it's just you, when you sit down to brainstorm ideas, the idea is to start with a question that is both targeted or tailored to what you're trying to create, but it's also giving you the mental space to think freely or broadly. So let me demonstrate that with you. For example, when you're trying to brainstorm answers to the following question, what is 2 plus 2? How many answers do you end up with? Usually it's 1, right? Yeah. That's not a generative question. That's not what I would consider generative. What I would think is more helpful for brainstorming freely is a different kind of question. I'm going to rephrase this now. What if I asked you, what numbers combined equal 4? You have an infinite set of solutions for that. So that's what I would call a generative question. You can call it something else, but that's the idea is, okay, you're specifying what you want to achieve. You're not specifying the means to it necessarily. Right, you're not restricting the solution space, if you will. So that is a more helpful for a brainstorming session you want to use that gets you set to think on the path. Like, before you choose a pilot project, you want to start with the broadest set of possibilities relevant to what you want to create. So this is why I think a generative question, creating it is a big deal. It's actually, I think, the most difficult step in this whole sequence that I showed you so far. So what I would like you to do with me in real time is, please pick a domain you wish to improve, or a problem or an issue. Write that down on your piece of paper. And it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just walking you through the process, but pick something and maybe write a few words about what your vision is for that issue. What does the horizon 3 for that thing look like or feel like? Does not have to be a big paragraph, maybe a few keywords, that's fine. But paint that picture. I'm going to demonstrate using this example. Maybe your issue does not sound anything like this, but this is the kind of thing I tend to work with when the time comes to use a generative question in our foresight work. This is the kind of result that participants are trying to convert into a generative question. So in this example, I've got a strategy. Leverage technological advances to increase the efficiency, effectiveness, and reach of our services. This probably applies to a broad range of firms. So you've got your issue, you've got some ideas of a vision, right? In this case, I want something efficient, effective, and widely reachable, accessible. Now, step number 2 is we're going to convert this issue, this topic you've got going on. And the way we're going to start is you're going to plug it into one of these blanks. It does not matter which of these 3 you choose. You can start it with imagine that, what if something? How might we, whatever your issue is, that you want to improve? It always ends with, what would that look like? This is step number 1. We're not there yet, but this is how to get started. So please go ahead and apply that to what you have written down. And I will show you an example of what I've done. So in my example, it's imagine that technological advances increase the efficiency, effectiveness, and reach of our services. What would that look like? Straightforward plugging in, not too complicated. What I would like you to do, if you're comfortable with this, we're going to do a before and after. So in the chat, would you please post your current question as you have it right now? Perfect. Anyone else dare? I see. Imagine contractors have more urgency. What would that look like? Imagine our program is sustainable. What would that look like? Imagine our process improvement team's project pipeline was full. Yes. What if everyone in your organization loved getting the annual performance review? Oh, that's a good one. Imagine our employers were using registered apprenticeships. Yes. Let's see, how might we quickly and efficiently route building permits and resubmittals? Yes. What if a community could predict their waste stream? The future of waste management is, by the way, one of my favorite topics. That's a good one. I love that. Most sustainable growth oriented organization over the next 4 years. Yes, these are great. Thank you. Okay. Let's move on to the next step. You're going to keep working on these. Some people get a generative question, the kind that I suggest, they get it right the first time. Most people don't, including myself. It takes a little bit of back and forth. So I'm going to walk you through a few more steps to make sure what, if in any way, can you refine this question to be as generative as possible. So this was step 2. Let's move on to step 3. There's a tendency to embed the solution inside the question. Let me show you an example. My example does that. So before it was, imagine that technological advances increase our services, right? There's a solution in here already assumed, and that is that we're going to use tech to accomplish this. Fair enough, nothing wrong with that. But with the generative question, what we want to do is take it out. What is the outcome you're trying to achieve? Focus more on that. So can you go look? I see you, Lynn. Can you look back to your question and see, does it assume a solution in any way? And if it does, can you cross it out and rewrite your question so it's still about the same issue you're trying to address, but you are not already dictating the method of solution? Some of you already are missing the solution component. That's great. See. I'll give you a minute for that. Well, less than a minute. But this is the sort of thing I see very often. It's like saying, imagine if we took 2 and 3, what would we get? You're already specifying how you're going to get the result. So that's not, don't do that. That's not what we're here for. This is step 3. Okay, I'm going to move on to step 4. Step 4 is about, if you have any jargon or any technical phrasings in your question, turn it into plain language. That's part of it. Maybe 4A, 4B, however you want to think about it. Another aspect that's really helpful is make it less about you or your organization or what you're going to do, and make it more about what does it look or feel like for the recipient or the user, the beneficiary of this thing you're trying to improve. What does it look and feel like to them? So let me show you an example. Before, this is what I had, right? Our services were effective, efficient, and reached everyone. What would that look like? Very nice question, but this one is a little better. This one is more about the user. Imagine that finding and using the right services was simple and effective for all. What would that look like? Maybe you would use different wording, but I hope you can see that the emphasis is shifted to not us, away from our services to the user, the people we're trying to improve their lives of. So again, please go back to your question, your latest draft, and see, can you simplify words in it, phrases? And is there an opportunity to shift the perspective inside your question? I find it very helpful to do this entire process like with a dictionary in hand or on the website. And it's this took me longer to do than 5 minutes. So it can, like I said, it takes a while sometimes to come back with fresh eyes and find ways to say the same or similar things in a different way. Okay, let's go on to the next step. Now, this is going to sound a little touchy-feely, but I'll explain. In this step, what it's about, what I would emphasize is there something that's, are there words or phrases or analogies you can bring in that are relevant and that touch more on perhaps the emotion, what it looks or what it, not what it looks, but what it feels like maybe, or what is seems more inspirational. Let me demonstrate what I mean by that. And that is, right, reminder, this was my question before, the most recent draft. There's more than one way to do this, but what if the words joy and empowerment are more meaningful to this team of people brainstorming this issue? Maybe you would use something else. You can say, oh, what if finding and using the right services is as easy as choose something? Recently, I upgraded from one phone to another, and the way the data was transferred was, it was magical. It was so easy. So for example, to me, it's meaningful to say, finding and using the right services is as easy as this data transfer experience I had. What would that look like? You can choose anything else. The wording and the phrasing you end up with depends a lot on what speaks to you. What do you find engaging, eliciting your curiosity, or your energy and your excitement? It also depends on what speaks to your teammates. This is why that writing this question should also be a team activity. Everyone comes up with their own version, you compare and contrast, but words matter, right? Words matter. So I'm going to show you a before and after. Before, remember, this is these strategies that I started with. Actually, I'm showing you two examples. So the top left strategy is what I started with, and the top right shows you a generative question I might use to help brainstorm ideas that are consistent with what the original question was. There's definitely more than one possible generative question for any problem you're trying to generate. This is just one version. But this is the kind of thinking I would use to help you draft a question that inspires different possibilities or solutions. In the second row, you'll see a completely different example. On the left side is a different kind of strategy I've seen with our clients. They say something to the effect of, make sure succession planning goes well. And yes, that is important, it's critical. How might that look as a generative question? Maybe the one on the right. How might we nurture leadership skills and caring for our firm's future among all our staff? What would that look like? Maybe if you did this, you would say something completely different, and that's perfectly fine. As long as the question you end up with feels big, it does not give away the solutions already. You can think of many ways of answering it. That is the place you want to start your brainstorming with. So right now, I would love to invite you to post this latest question in the chat to share with us. This is the before and after. Again, it does not have to be perfect. It's fully integrated into client service. What would that look like? Imagine if our city staff felt supported, resourced, and empowered. What would that look like? Yes, helping people find, explore, grow their innate creative passion. What would that look like? Wow, this is huge. It feels so big. Thank you. Yeah, keep it coming. Coming back, while you post there, coming back to the process I showed you way earlier at the start. Oopsie, hold on. Can I go back to the beginning? Ah, Here we are. Right. This is the kind of question you would start with. That's what I meant by step one. And then you sit down with your teammates or yourself and you figure out, all right, what skills do I got? What social networks am I a part of? What was it again? Physical assets. What physical assets do I have access, or what capital, or what program, or connections, anything. Who do you know that you are willing to share with your teammates? What assets do you have that you have access to? You don't have to ask someone else for permission to use it. That's important, by the way. You already have access to these assets and you are feeling comfortable with sharing them with potential teammates. Assets that meet these two requirements, those are the kinds of things you would brainstorm in this second step. And that's why, if you read the description for today's session, right, what are some kick-ass projects that don't need permission or money? It's because, where does that come from? It's because the assets you're using to come up with pilot projects, they are only assets you already own. You start with what you have, basically. This point also connects to actually part two, right? Which was about picking the right people to join you in this journey. When you're doing this step about brainstorming assets, who is on your team? Who do you want to have on your team? Who might have out there assets other than the ones you have, who might help you with this question? So here's another opportunity to think about who you want with you on your bus, so to speak. All right, we've been through this before. Okay, while I'm scrolling through, I'm about to I have one more slide left, and then I will finally get out of slide mode, and I invite you to share any alternative methods, if you will, or questions, of course. Let me skip ahead. Sorry. And since we're recording this session, you don't have to take frantic notes here. This will be available to you. I'm also working on a blog article to summarize this, so don't worry. You will have access to this. All right. Here we are. Whoops. Okay. You can see this is just a reminder. I don't know if you can see that actually. Just a moment. Play in this video. Yep, here it is. Okay. So as you can see, this is just me diving a little bit more into the big easy ranking approach. So what you would do is, in this case, you start with rating each opportunity, each of your top 3 or 4 opportunity or
Yes,
ideas.
you need to share the screen.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry about that. Are we on? Is this, you can see the table, the big easy? Yes, okay, sorry about that. Yes, so what you would do is take one project idea at a time, your top 3 or 4, and first you rank it in terms of impact on a scale of 1 to 5, or whatever scale you wish to use, but I recommend 1 to 5. So 1 is low impact, 5 is high impact. Each person gives it a rating, and you can sum those ratings. So that's the second column, if you see in this table. Ratings of 5, 4, 3, 2, whatever it is, that's one number. That's your impact score for that opportunity. And you first do impact scoring for each opportunity. Then you move on to rating each opportunity in terms of easiness or difficulty in executing it. Use the same method on a scale of 1 to 5. It can get a little tricky. So 1 is not easy, 1 is difficult, or 5 is easy. It's up to you. Just make sure you and your teammates know what 1 means and what 5 means. And you sum those scores up, and then you get an ease score, if you will, for each opportunity. And then you sum those 2 things up, the impact score and your ease score, and that gives you your total number. And maybe you'll see that one opportunity clearly outruns the others in terms of its total score, or maybe they all kind of score similarly. If that happens, that's okay. That's when you come in with your question about how excited do I feel about this? What's my energy level for this? Or perhaps it requires more discussion about what each opportunity is really about. Sometimes you might find that you and your teammates have completely different assessments of impact or difficulty. Someone gives it a 5, someone else gives it a 1. That's okay. That's an opportunity to stop and have a conversation about what made you think, or what gives you reason to score this a 5, and why do you think this will score a 1 in terms of whatever it is, impact or difficulty. It's an opportunity to spell out, maybe there's something we're missing, or someone is far more knowledgeable, or they don't know enough, and so that's why it seems more difficult. Whatever it is, have those conversations, and then you can redo the scoring, if you will, for that. But that's how this step works. Now, I'm going to stop sharing finally. And I would love to know if there are any questions I can take. Or perhaps someone has a completely different approach to picking pilot projects, and I would love to hear those as well.
Yeah, yes, I have one question. You know, how long do you think this process takes? It sounds like a couple meetings, several hours. Just wanted to get your feedback on that.
Yeah. So this process, the true answer is it depends. Let me give you a better answer than that. So these steps that I showed you are technically part of a process called strategic doing. It's an approach out of Purdue University. So when I run workshops using that approach, which does it all the way what you've seen today, and also goes further into helping you flesh out the details, a schedule, and an action plan, immediate action plan of a pilot project. When you go through the whole thing, what I would estimate is you can probably do this with two-hour sessions live with homework in between, and possibly maybe even a preparation session. Give everyone a heads up of what the process even is about. So I want to say, okay, let's say 6 hours of work, whether it's live or offline. It could be something like that. I wouldn't spend all day on this. It's exhausting. In fact, when we were in person, when we were running in-person workshops, we would do 4 or 6 hour sessions. That's possible. But in an online environment, you want to do shorter segments and spacing things out and give people opportunity to think. Especially this coming up with a question for a team to work on. That I highly recommend doing that before you show up for the first live meeting, because this is so messy and you got to compare and discuss and choose words and change phrases. So there's some prep in front of it, but this is not a 6 months process to come up with this pilot project. All right. Any other questions I could take about what I shared with you today? This is certainly not the only way to choose really good pilot projects, but I think what I like about strategic doing is, right, start with the right kind of question. Start with assets you already have. Look for the big easy, not the biggest project or the easiest project, but something that does both. And check your excitement level for that. I think that's another way to, as another criteria to use in selecting your projects. And then fleshing it out. I mean, we all do it, right? So how do you operationalize an idea? That's when you brainstorm, okay, what does success look like? What is one small pilot project we do? But I keep talking, I'm sorry. Let me give you some space. More questions I can take or reflections on this.
Yes, would you suggest to start with something relatively easy as a way of getting people into this, or start with the really big changes? For an example, a lot of businesses today are looking to keep people working from home and reduce their office space.
Mhm.
That's a humongous decision, but it's an immediate one. So would you start with something smaller and then move to bigger impact, or although that one probably is pretty big impact?
That's a good question. Here's how I would think about it. I would start with the right question and use the question as you can use the process of writing the question, or you can use a drafted question as a way to gauge input or people who want to take part in it. If that's answering your question. You mean, Joan, you mean what the level of impact needs to be not huge. You want to start smaller and easy, because that's an opportunity for you to test something and see, is it working? So for example, okay, here's the best answer. Instead of making everyone go remote immediately, you want to start with a subset of people, test them out, make sure maybe they have different working styles. How does everyone perform? So it's a small subset of folks in this example that you would try something with, learn from their experiences, because maybe additional guidance is needed. Maybe there's issues with equipment that haven't been thought about before, or maybe finally someone figures out, oh, we can't just make everyone work from home, because what about childcare needs? What about elderly care needs? There's a whole another background activity going on. We can't just dump things on folks to do from work. If you don't know these things yet, you want to try this out, test them before you escalate to a whole company, for example, in terms of such a policy. So that's how I would think about it. Small pilot projects, start there. Does that help? Okay. Any other questions I can take? Okay. Pretty straightforward. As I mentioned, I'm gonna soon post a written version of this process that you can reference and share if you wish. And I always welcome any questions or comments you have afterwards, any advice for better instructions. Because I tried finding someone else spelling out how to create these questions out of an issue or out of a topic, and I have not been able to find it. I see examples of this kind of question for therapy, or when you're interviewing a candidate. But when you're trying to brainstorm solutions to a subject area and you're trying to create the future for it, how do you create this question? Where do you go? How do you start with a problem or a topic and go to this more open-ended question? That process I haven't seen yet spelled out, so I'm hoping this will be helpful. Okay, well then, it sounds like we're all fed, we fed our souls for today with Futures Friday. Thank you again for being with me here, and enjoy the rest of your 15 minutes until the next big thing you've got going on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.